Resident Evil Requiem is just a month away, and even though we just got a showcase about a week ago, we're actually left with more questions than answers. However, where there are mysteries for hardcore Eagle Eye fans like myself to solve, there's also a ton of theories surrounding these questions in the hopes that one of them just maybe lands and surprises all of us. So on this episode of Nerdspace Games, we're taking a look at some of the craziest, most insane fan theories out there. But we're not just looking at complete bonker theories, no, that's way too easy. Instead, I want to focus on the wildest theories that could potentially, even if it's a long shot, be true. I'm also going to avoid theories that I've personally predicted and covered in previous breakdown videos of mine, so yeah, no more Spencer is the main villain or Grace is a test tube baby theory. Side note, some of these theories I did borrow from some of the viewers of the channel as I posted in the community section asking for some suggestions, and honestly, there were actually a few good ones, so yeah, I'll be shouting them out when I get to them. Before we get started though, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more constant updates on Resident Evil Requiem, and check out the official Nerdspace Games shop, which features custom-made artwork by the talented Demento Artworks. Right now we have the Chris Boulder Punching Asshole collection available, but I have future designs in the works that feature Leon, Wesker, and Jill, so definitely check out the store and see if anything catches your attention. Link to the shop is down in the description of today's video, but without further ado, let's jump straight into it. Number 1, Victor Gideon is not a villain. At the time of recording this video, Capcom has gone all in on making us think that the main villain of the game is Victor Gideon, an ex-researcher of Umbrella that's responsible for Project Elpis. Now, while I don't think Victor Gideon is the main villain of the game, I do personally think he's going to be the main antagonist for the first few hours of Requiem or so while we're exploring Redwood Hotel and the Care Center. With that being said, shout out to Ivy Zombie for bringing this one to my attention, but what if Victor Gideon isn't a villain at all? At least not a full I hate the world type of villain that we're used to with the Resident Evil franchise. Instead, maybe Victor Gideon's goal is not to create a new strain of the T-Virus that's more powerful than anything we've encountered so far, or even save himself, but rather he's trying to create something that could rid the world of all viruses, infections, and diseases. Essentially, Victor Gideon is trying to end the war against BOWs once and for all. That's why he wants Grace's blood so bad, because he needs it to perfect the Elpis virus to destroy all BOWs and viruses around the world. There's a few pieces of evidence that could point towards this. First off, this scene right here shows a mysterious woman, a secretary of Gideon, holding a file that reads Panacea. This word actually means a remedy for all difficulties and diseases. Perhaps Victor's goal all along is to create this remedy to fight against the viruses that have plagued the world since the rise and fall of Umbrella. This would also explain why the government may have allowed Gideon to hide in Rhodes Hill and even perform experiments on infected individuals in the ruins of Raccoon City for all of these years. Another piece of evidence goes back to something Gideon says in the most recent trailer.
Why did you kidnap me?
Kidnap you? I liberated you.
Now, my original thought is that Gideon believes he liberated Grace from the DSO, who's been hiding her away from him since they found her years ago. But what if there's more to this? What if he's pretty much telling Grace that she was a prisoner of people that didn't want Gideon to create this remedy of all viruses in the world, and to do that, they try to hide her away from him and the people he works for? Kind of a stretch, I know, but this theory could connect some pieces that we've been unable to solve thus far. Still, even if all of this is true, Gideon still has to be somewhat evil. He may not be a full-blown villain due to him doing it for the right reasons, but the extremes that he appears to go through in his research for creating this remedy is what paints him as a morally bad individual. I mean, he's caused multiple outbreaks, it seems, created some pretty disturbing monsters, and there's even some evidence of him abducting children for some of his experiments. So yeah, maybe he's doing it for the right reason, but he's still a dick. Number 2, Leon has been infected long before Resident Evil Requiem. It may come to no surprise to any of you by now that Leon is clearly infected with something, probably the Elpis virus, based on the black marks on his skin and the color shade of his eyes. However, diving a little more into this, there may be a more wild theory out there that explains how Leon got infected and his entire motivations for going after Gideon. See, from what we know about Elpis, it's possible that some versions of this virus takes a long time to worsen and change people infected with it. Gideon is the perfect example of this. He clearly looks like he's been infected with Elpis, but from what we can see in the trailers, he's been infected with it for years, potentially at least 8 years. Yet, it still seems like he has full control of himself, despite having some odd physical traits. Well, what if the same thing could be said about Leon? See, Leon actually worked for the DSO ever since the Raccoon City incident, after he was basically forced to work for them as the government threatened Sherry if he didn't. Since then, Leon went through some extremely difficult training sessions, some of which he claimed almost killed him. Well, maybe at some point the government wanted to turn Leon into some sort of super soldier, and they used the most successful strand of the Elpis virus at the time to do this. I'm not saying that he's been infected ever since he survived Raccoon City. They could have just waited until some other time after Resident Evil 6 to infect him with it. But eventually, when they figured that Leon was slowly becoming more resistant to their orders, they decided to infect him with it and turn him into a super soldier that, when they wanted to, they could attempt to control him if he rebelled against them too much. This would explain some of the things we've seen in the trailers, like Leon's disappointment when he's looking over files related to Elpis. Perhaps during the events of Requiem, the side effects begin to occur and Leon realizes that he's infected, and he seeks out Sherry Birkin's help since he can't communicate with Hunnigan in secret since she's at DSO headquarters, to help him eradicate the virus inside of him. Obviously, this theory is a stretch like most of the ones on this list, but it does connect to a few other wild fan theories out there that I love, and honestly, some of which you'll probably see later on today's list. Number 3, deceased fan favorites will return as hallucinations. Sticking with wild theories in relation to Leon's infection, whether he was infected long before the events of the game or it occurs at the start of the game, there's another theory that I really love and I hope is true because man, it'll be some major fan service for fans of the series. This theory is one that I saw Does Gollum post as a theory, not as a leak, and it's one that I wanted to talk about because it opens up the door for a lot of insane possibilities. As with other viruses and parasites throughout the series, like Lost Plagas and Resident Evil 4, one of the side effects of Elpis might be hallucinations. Perhaps during the different stages of being infected with Elpis, Leon begins to hallucinate, and most of his hallucinations come in the form of his past coming back to haunt him. One of the things that Resident Evil Requiem seems to hint towards is the fact that Leon's past is slowly taking a toll on him. The amount of people close to him that he had to watch die, and he even honors them with a watch and a gun that has a wing symbol etched into them, signifying his fallen comrades, all point towards the trauma that Leon suffers from losing people close to him to BOWs. So what if these hallucinations come in the form of these fallen comrades that Leon lost ever since Raccoon City? This would create a unique opportunity as we would be able to see the return of deceased fan favorite characters of the series. People like Marvin, Luis, Krauser, and other individuals that Leon had to watch die because of this war against BOWs. This would be the perfect fan service moment in the series in my opinion, and if Capcom decided to lean this way, man oh man, I would literally lose my mind. This could also go in the direction of villains as well. Maybe we can see him hallucinate some old boss fights like Mr. X, William Birkin, or even Derek Simmons. Not to mention the amount of horror and jump scares these hallucinations can create, potentially giving us Evil Within type of scares and atmospheres. If this insane fan theory turned out to be true, what deceased character would you like to see Leon face as a hallucination in Resident Evil Requiem? Also, side note, I think this hallucination bit could be a really cool way to reveal a twist later in the game, like maybe a different protagonist that we thought was still alive could be revealed to be deceased now due to something that happened prior to Requiem. Like what if Ada Wong died in front of Leon at some point between RE6 and Requiem, and this is revealed to us in the form of Ada showing up as one of the hallucinations that haunts Leon. Yikes. Number 4, the Hag is a clone of Grace Ashcroft. Okay, so one insane theory that I can't seem to pinpoint the origins of since a lot of different people have been talking about it for a while is how the Hag may very well be a clone of Grace Ashcroft. I think I've seen Spear Hunter mention this theory. I've also seen Dusk Gollum post about this theory, so there's a lot of different people talking about this specific theory. Anyways, in previous breakdown videos of mine, I've talked about how Grace is probably a test tube baby as an experiment created in a lab as the perfect vessel for Elpis. She's the only example of someone bonding with Elpis successfully and not mutating into a disgusting BOW. Well, what if there's more to this, like always? What if after Gideon and his researchers realized Grace successfully bonded with Elpis, they attempted to recreate their success by making clones of her? However, since Grace was saved by Leon or Alyssa or someone when the labs were raided, Gideon lost the one thing that could help him successfully recreate Grace again. Therefore, he began to clone Grace again and again and again, changing things about her that could potentially repeat the same process and success that he had with Grace, but each of these experiments failed. One of these clone experiments could have ended up as the Hag, the stalker enemy chasing after Grace in the care center. Now personally, I'm not the biggest fan of this theory, as I think this is Alyssa Ashcroft still. Regardless though, I do love this theory, as it would show the horrors that Gideon is willing to do in order to recreate his success with Grace, and it just makes us hate this piece of shit even more than we already do. Also, if this is true, we could see more versions of Grace in different forms, like, I don't know, maybe a young girl connected to Grace's objectives in the game and is the same girl that dropped this quote in the first trailer of Resident Evil Requiem.
Everyone's gone.
Number 5, the family returns. Most of the theories on this list are ones I've personally never mentioned in my breakdowns before, mostly because they are completely insane and very unlikely to be true. However, the one exception to this rule is this next entry, as a few videos ago, I did have a kind of crazy theory that the family, no, not that one, sorry bakers, but rather the secret organization known as the Family in Resident Evil 6 would make their return to the series in RE9. In case you guys missed my theory on this one, here's the breakdown of it. Basically, I, along with every other fan out there, think and believes that Gideon is not the main villain and that he's working for someone. However, this someone or organization has to have some major influence within the US government if Gideon's been able to go uninterrupted for so long. Well, Resident Evil 6 introduced us to a secret organization that predated even Mother Miranda. This organization would build its influence over centuries, putting themselves into positions of power all around the world. Derek Simmons, one of the main villains of Resident Evil 6, was the National Security Advisor to the President of the United States, and for a time, he was the leader of the family. This right here showcases how powerful this secret organization really was. Now, after the events of RE6, the family cut ties with Derek Simmons, leaving him to his fate, and we can assume that they found a new leader and continued their pursuit of power in other ways, but we never really heard from them again after RE6. So my theory is that Gideon is working for the family to create a remedy that cures all viruses, but they don't have good intentions with it. It's a stretch, but considering the amount of mechanics and features RE9 has brought over from Resident Evil 6, like the quick shot mechanic, clearly Nakanishi is aware of the events of that game, and they are at the very least on his mind. Number 6, Leon's wings connect to Claire's death. Alright, Claire Redfield fans, don't hate me for this one, as I'm not the first person coming up with this theory, and I damn sure won't be the last. Anyway, one of the biggest fan theories that have been making its way around the web right now is the fact that someone close to Leon will die either before the events of the first game or at the start of the game. A big reason for this comes in the form of the god-awful collaborations that clearly Capcom is cashing in on. In all seriousness, it's not just the watch, but the Requiem, the gun, as well, in which both feature a very interesting design choice. Both Leon's watch and his gun feature this wing symbol. Now, we know that this wing apparently symbolizes fallen comrades, and I mentioned earlier how this could be in honor of the people Leon lost in his long fight against BOWs. But, as always, what if there's more to this? Digging a little deeper, there's one other protagonist in the Resident Evil series known to be associated with wings on her clothing, jewelry, etc. That being Claire Redfield. The famous Maiden Heaven jacket worn by Claire Redfield combined with this necklace in the remake of Resident Evil 2 all point towards Claire being somewhat connected to the wing symbol. So what if Leon is not only wearing this watch and wielding this gun with a wing on both of them in honor of his fallen comrades, but it's also a tribute to one of the closest people in Leon's life, Claire Redfield. Granted, this theory is a little out there, and if anybody close to Leon will die, it's gotta be Ada Wong, because there's no way that Capcom will kill off Claire Redfield and not have our favorite Boy Scout, Chris Redfield, getting immediately involved with his, 10th revenge arc, you know? Number 7, Leon killed Alyssa Ashcroft. Shout out to Edmeta1Core for breaking down this next theory to me, but what if Leon is involved with the death of Alyssa Ashcroft? Now, technically speaking, this is a theory that's been around ever since the first trailer, as some people believe that this hooded man was in fact Leon S. Kennedy. Back then, I immediately shut that shit down, because I refused to believe that Capcom would ever turn their golden boy into some sort of murderer, especially of a different returning protagonist. However, as always, what if there's more to this? I'm gonna keep saying that phrase over and over and over again, so you guys are gonna get tired of that phrase. Going back to Leon's infection and the possibility that he's been infected for a long time, what if Leon was being controlled by Gideon or the US government? Because of the situation surrounding Grace Ashcroft, maybe the DSO forced Leon via the Elvis virus to track down Alyssa and Grace and retrieve Grace for Gideon and his team. This would explain why Capcom has been so secretive about this hooded man and Alyssa's death, even though he doesn't look anything like Gideon in my opinion. If this is true, this could be the dark secret that connects Leon to Elvis. Perhaps he was infected with Elvis, used by it to target Grace, killed her mother in an attempt to retrieve her, and then knocked unconscious by Grace before he ever got a good look at her. This would explain why Leon seems so upset and he's constantly facing something in his past that he regrets in the trailers. It would also explain Leon's reaction to him looking through the files on Elvis before eventually coming across Grace, realizing that he was actually responsible for the death of her mother. Again, I think this might be very unlikely, mostly due to the fact that this is Capcom's Golden Boy that we're talking about, even if it was out of his control, but there's definitely a small possibility he's involved with Alyssa's death based on how upset he was when he saw Grace's file in the trailer. Number 8, Ada is responsible for Gideon finding Grace. On the same topic of blaming someone else for the death of Alyssa and ultimately Grace being found by Gideon and the hooded man, some fans seem to believe that Ada is actually involved with locating Grace and ultimately, in a way, being the cause of Alyssa's death. This would immediately cause a rift between Grace and Leon in the story, when Leon would have to stand between them and stop Grace from wanting to get revenge on Ada for giving Gideon the information about Grace and Alyssa's whereabouts. Essentially, this theory is based on Ada being hired by Gideon or the company that he works for to locate Grace Ashcroft, the surviving test subject that bonded with Elvis. Once she locates Grace, she reports to Gideon, and then Gideon sends people after her to retrieve her, which ultimately ends in the death of Alyssa. Ada wasn't aware of how dire this situation was and didn't even realize it would lead to the death of Grace's mother, leaving her with regret over the whole situation and even questioning her own morale as a mercenary for hire. When Grace and Leon finds out about this, Grace ends up trying to kill Ada, similar to Chris in Resident Evil 6, leading to Leon potentially stepping between them and trying to stop Grace from going down the dark path of vengeance. I actually think this is a very clever way to bring Ada into the story of Requiem, and honestly, between this one and Leon killing Alyssa himself, I think this theory is way more likely. Still, again, it would put another fan favorite character in a dark light, but at least with Ada, it's a little more understandable based on her own motives thus far into the series. It also sets Ada up to have a redemption arc by the end of the game, potentially giving her life to save Grace or doing something that gets both Leon and Grace out of danger at the last second. Number 9, some infected survive Raccoon City. Out of all the theories on today's list, I think this one might be the least crazy one, considering the fact that Raccoon City has been in lockdown ever since the outbreak in 1998, allowing it to essentially become the perfect destination for experiments for various purposes. Obviously, we'll probably see some of the Elvis infected zombies here in Raccoon City, but digging a little deeper, especially once we get to the underground locations of Raccoon City, I wonder if we'll see classic monsters infected with the T-virus return as well. Considering that Raccoon City is in ruins, but not completely wiped out, I feel like it's possible that some of the monsters in the city, especially ones that were underground in labs or somewhere else within the city, survived the destruction of the city. For example, how badass would it be to see apocalyptic versions of classic Resident Evil monsters, like the Lickers and the Hunters? And since there's already something similar to Crimson Heads confirmed with the Elvis virus, I wonder if we could see traditional Crimson Heads in Raccoon City, since there might be some zombie bodies that mutated over time, turning them into super zombies. If you wanted to go even farther with it, you could potentially see the return of boss enemies as well. Sure, William Birkin, G. Birkin, is probably unlikely since he exploded in the Umbrella Lab, but monsters like Nemesis and other offspring of Birkin could potentially survive since they were all underground when Raccoon City was destroyed. Even if Nemesis was one giant blob of a mess, just blood and guts all over the place. He regenerates, for crying out loud. I wouldn't put it past them. Anyways, clearly there's a reason why the government decided to keep Raccoon City in lockdown and continue research there, and maybe the reason for this is because they have a bunch of free test subjects infected with the T-virus to test on now, hence why it's a perfect testing location for Elvis and potentially this remedy to cure all viruses. Probably the most wild one that came to me after watching the showcase last week is that maybe, just maybe, Grace Ashcroft is a clone of Sherry Birkin. Yeah, I know, pretty crazy, right? Well, if we go back to the theory that Grace is not only a test tube baby, but a clone, then a new question presents itself. Who is Grace a clone of? Now, some fans out there, including Descalum, seem to think that Grace might be a clone of Alyssa Ashcroft. However, I can't see why a clone of Alyssa Ashcroft bonds better with Elvis than Alyssa herself. Otherwise, why wouldn't they just kidnap Alyssa instead of Grace at Everwood Hotel? Instead, I think Grace has to be a clone of a different individual that is enhanced by some other virus or parasite that ultimately gave her unique abilities to counter any infection that she came across. Well, there's two people that come to mind that share that description to me, and one of them we've kind of already seen in trailers already, sort of. I give you Sherry Birkin. Going back to the trailers, the Leon reveal gave us this image, showing us someone that looks vaguely familiar to Sherry from Resident Evil 6. Her voice when talking to Leon even sounds like Sherry. And going back to RE6, we see that the G virus has given Sherry unique abilities over time, allowing her to almost instantly heal from fatal injuries. An ability like this probably could resist any sort of virus and parasite in the Resident Evil universe, which we can assume is exactly what Gideon is trying to create, right? Not to mention, the government probably already has a ton of blood samples of Sherry Birkin from when she was used in like a bunch of like experiments or labs, or they were doing a bunch of testing on her, because Sherry Birkin did mention that she was being tested on in Resident Evil 6 when she was younger. Now, if we go with this assumption and the assumption that Gideon is looking to create something that could resist any kind of virus or parasite in the world, then technically speaking, Sherry Birkin should be the perfect person to create clones with, using her blood to then use as test subjects for Elpis. Grace could have been one of those clones, and out of all the test subjects, she was the only one to resist Elpis without transforming into a monster. I know, kind of a stretch, like always, but think about it. This would explain why Leon is talking directly to Sherry versus Hunnigan, because she's more directly connected to the case. It actually explains a lot of the questions we still have about Requiem, even if it seems a bit far-fetched. But that does it for this episode of Nerd Space Games. Hit up the comments and let me know what you think of my list. Which insane theory in today's video do you think could potentially be true? What other crazy theories do you have about Resident Evil Requiem that didn't crack my list? Let me know all of your thoughts down below. Anyway, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to my channel for more survival horror content. Also, leave a like on today's video if you enjoyed today's topic. Well, thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerd Space Games. Take care.